Dead by Daylight can only move forward as fast as its slowest players. If you've ever spent time reading what people say online in forums, chats, and comment sections, you know as well as I do that there are a lot of slow players in Dead by Daylight. Okay, so slow probably isn't the best word, but that saying I used before does fit what I'm going to discuss here. I don't mean to sound like I'm above being slow myself, because I know from experience that's definitely not true. It's part of the process of learning anything, be it a useful life skill, career path, or, more importantly, Dead by Daylight. And to be sure, Dead by Daylight's a difficult game to learn. New players are dropped into a game full of perks they don't understand, that aren't explained to them, into maps they don't know, and against killers whose powers they have no idea how to counter or avoid. Players who like the core gameplay enough to want to overcome the challenge of learning how to play DBD will likely defer to friends who already know, or content creators who explain in video or live stream form. When I say how to play, I'm not referring to understanding the objective of the game, but rather how the meta influences how players achieve the objective. Learning the in-game meta, as well as the more abstract moral meta, is not at all intuitive to new players, and nor could it be. The game is vague and somewhat obtuse by design to facilitate a further sense of fear in players who come to the game for a more authentic horror survival experience. Perk values used to be represented by words like slightly, moderately, or tremendously, and we had to rely on data miners, or on occasion developers, to explain the actual numbers. The game didn't launch with a tutorial, and the one we have today does nothing to explain perks that are now fundamental to the way we play the game. How did the killer know exactly where I was after he hooked that survivor even though I was hiding behind a rock? Why is it that sometimes when I let go of a generator it sparks and begins regressing? Why is the generator blocked by weird spider legs now? As a tangential point here, I think that the loading screens before and after trials should show detailed examples of common perks, or any perks, add-ons, or items for that matter. Kind of like how Dark Souls shows item descriptions on loading screens. Understanding all of these things is essential to high-level play in Dead by Daylight, regardless of how they're explained. The meta is an ever-changing, living thing to which we all contribute whenever we play or talk about the game. That said, to repeat my original statement, Dead by Daylight can only move forward as fast as its slowest players. Forward is a subjective term. Was MMR a step forward for the game or a step back? What about Boon or Scourge perks? Arguments can be made that reframe every possible decision as one forwards or backwards in the game's development, and every player sees the game differently. If a new survivor believes the best strategy is to hide at the edge of the map, then they will probably think perks that allow the killer to find them easier are steps backwards from what the game is meant to be about. But I don't want to talk about survivors here as much as I want to discuss some changes that would be steps forward for the killer side. There are 3 basic changes to killer that I would consider steps forward for the game at large, especially at higher levels of play. However, they are changes that I believe would backfire if actually implemented, and unfortunately, killers can't be trusted with what I'm going to propose. The first change on my imaginary wish list is a change to the killer's HUD to include the hook states of each individual survivor. This would help me to spread hooks among survivors more evenly without accidentally sacrificing anybody early by mistake. If a survivor reached second stage on the hook and I was too busy to notice at the time, it would help me realize that they were death hook by the next time I downed them. If 2 or more survivors are wearing similar or identical cosmetics, or even just playing the same character, I wouldn't accidentally tunnel anybody because I would know who I had hooked and who I hadn't. Players who are new to Killer, however, would likely see this information and interpret it as an instruction manual from the game on who to kill first. If Nancy hasn't been hooked, but Bill is death hook, and it says so right on my screen, I need to kill Bill first. Not just new players, but players across the board would have an easier time tunneling out the survivor closest to death more often because, even without the survivor hook states on screen, the game is designed to encourage that behavior if you want to win. Most of the time, unless a game is particularly stressful and I'm feeling like I'm getting steamrolled by good survivors who are organized, I want to hook everybody at least once, ideally twice before getting any kills. Of course, this change isn't realistic, but people tunnel survivors anyway, so I'm not sure if much would really change big picture. Another feature on my list of changes I want, but don't want, is to be able to see the MMR ratings of everyone visible in the lobby. Survivors would be able to see their own ratings as well as the ratings of their teammates, and killers would be able to see their own rating and the ratings of all the survivors. What I want here is a terrible idea that would be a huge problem for matchmaking at large. Survivors would dodge other survivors if their MMR was too low, and killers would dodge survivors if their MMR was too high. If there were 2 or 3 survivors with notably higher MMR ratings than the other 1 or 2, then the killer would be incentivized to target the lower MMR players at the start of the trial, and possibly tunnel them out of the game. But it would be nice to be able to know before the trial what you're going up against as killer in terms of player skill. Sometimes it can feel like the match was over before it started because the survivors against whom you're playing are too skilled and efficient for the build you've brought into the trial, but there was no way to know until it was too late. Essentially, I'd like to see the MMR ratings before the trial to best avoid getting completely destroyed in a match due to either the build I'm bringing or even the mindset I have. My expectations would be completely different of high MMR survivors than low ones, and while being able to identify the skill of a survivor in-game is an important killer skill in itself, it can be exhausting and can become boring to try too hard at the beginning of each trial on the chance that the survivors are good. Another reason my idea is terrible is that high MMR survivors will have a much higher chance of only playing against killers who are trying really hard to win, both in terms of builds and mindset in-game. High MMR ratings don't necessarily dictate how a player is going to behave in any given trial, and survivors would, in response to killers over-preparing, feel they have to prepare their best builds preemptively and sweat every match just to break even. A lot of people complain that SBMM has already caused this exact issue, so there's really no sense in making it worse. And finally, perhaps my worst idea of them all. I'd like to be able to know in the pre-game lobby which survivors are grouped via survivor friends. I said before that you have to play differently and adjust your decisions to suit the skill of survivors, and this is also true, sometimes more so, for survivors on comms. Identifying individual survivors as good is one thing, but to be able to definitively say that survivors are communicating is another. To leave such a game-changing element to chance and guesswork feels like we're setting killers up to work overtime. As Survivor, communicating with other survivors gives you a huge advantage that you wouldn't otherwise have. Remember earlier when I said that the game is somewhat vague and obtuse by design? Comms circumvent this almost entirely, revealing who the killer is, where hex totems are, what pellets have been used, and much more. As killer, there are some ways you can try to identify survivor friends. For example, say you load into a lobby and two Dwights dressed as Christmas presents join at the same time, or two survivors with matching names. You can assume they will communicate with each other and adjust your gameplay accordingly. But in-game, it often isn't clear until it's too late to really matter. Say you chase one survivor past your hex totem. You can keep chasing that survivor to make sure that they don't cleanse the totem as soon as you leave them, but what if they've told one or more of the other survivors where the totem is? The smart play in terms of totem defense might be at the time to abandon chase and go back to the totem to catch whoever received the intel off guard. Your mind games and how you play the 4v1 have to be entirely different. To be clear, I'm not judging here how powerful Survivor Friends is, but rather how it changes how the killer must play in order to keep up. I think it's only fair for the killer to know to expect a different kind of game going in, rather than finding out the hard way in the exit gate. You know what I don't think is fair though? Getting dodged repeatedly because you want to play Survivor with your friends. Killers will use this information to avoid Survivor Friends at all costs, rather than use the information to try and play better or improve. Pair this with revealing MMR to the killer and you have infinite wait times. So, in the end, as you can see, all of my ideas are terrible. That said, I would like the option to opt into seeing my own MMR rating for Survivor and each killer. I would also like to be able to see the MMR ratings of all players after a trial in the end screen. I think it would be good as Survivor to be able to see who is in a group amongst your team to better organize altruism and teamwork in general. Knowing people are on comms changes how you play solo too. Well, that's it for now. Hopefully you disagreed with all of my terrible ideas, and if you'd like to see me make more videos like this, then press the like button, because that really does help me see that these kind of videos are being received well, and tells me that I should keep making them. The end? The end. Oh my god, thank you so much for doing that.
Oh my god!
He's very upset right now.
Best fury I've ever seen.
Yep, on the same side of the pallet and everything.
Yeah.
And he's dead, Jesus Christ.